Robert, his brother, who join us today and will present the awards. I want to acknowledge the generosity of the family and the trustees they've established in supporting the Doubleday Centre in the University of Manchester and making possible this very important event in the annual calendar of our medical school. Enormous thanks are due to John Doubleday, himself a distinguished sculptor whose work graces the medical school reception area in the Stopford building, which sadly we can't see at the moment, or some of us can. And recipients of the awards today are going to see via Zoom the beautiful medal that he has designed and created, and that I know they will treasure as a memento of the honour that they received this afternoon. I want to thank the many people who worked behind the scenes to put this event together, especially Dr. Rabina Shah, Director of the Doubleday Centre, Karen Cottrell, Ian Speakman, and our student society officers who will also be joining us today. And of course, I don't have to do the usual housekeeping about fire alarms and so on, but questions for our speaker can be placed on the chat, and we have a few minutes in the session, and Shirley Houston has very kindly agreed to answer some questions as time allows. Dr. Rabina Shah, as many of you know, is Director of the Doubleday Centre for Patient Experience, and she's now going to set the scene for our afternoon and in a presentation she's prepared. Ian. Which will begin any second now.
I think there's a sound problem.
I think Rabina is on mute.
Yeah.
Yes, there should be background music playing. I apologise to everybody. I don't know why it's not playing with the slides, which is a shame. There's a problem with the sound. It's a shame.
Well, thank you, Rubina, for preparing the photo montage. I'm sorry to participants that sadly we missed the accompanying sound, but I hope that the slides nevertheless gave you a flavour of all of the background work that many of us, but not everybody here this afternoon, will know have culminated in the work, that the position that we're now in, and the position of the Doubleday Centre and its ideas and plans for the future. As Dr. Shah reflected to us at the start of the slide presentation, the inspiration for this event is the life of Dr. Edwin Doubleday. Edwin, John's son and Robert's brother, was awarded his University of Manchester medical degree posthumously. And we remember that Edwin, in his life, aspiration and values, was a person who exemplified many qualities that we prize in the University of Manchester and make us so very proud of our students. In establishing the Doubleday Fund in Edwin's memory, his family have enabled the University of Manchester Medical School to play a leading and innovative role in genuinely integrating patient and public involvement at many levels in medical education, in its governance and in the development and delivery of the curriculum. And all of us who work in the medical school are immensely appreciative of the Doubleday Trust's continuing commitment to this work. The first project undertaken by the Doubleday Fund was the sponsorship of the Doubleday Manchester Award, which seeks to emphasise the importance of breadth in medical training. And this award is granted to an individual of standing who has made a significant contribution to patient care in a whole variety of different ways, and who in turn is invited to deliver a lecture at the University of Manchester. The 2020 award is being conferred on our guest speaker this afternoon, Shirley Houston. She is a distinguished Lancastrian actor and is especially well known for her wide-ranging television work. I think it would be remiss of me not to highlight her decade-long association with another great Manchester institution, Coronation Street. She has worked very, very hard to highlight issues of accessibility and inclusivity for people with a disability, both in her own professional capacity and in her personal commitments to many charities and campaigns. And in this, she is a great role model for disability awareness, particularly from her own lived experience, and we greatly look forward to hearing her talk. So before she begins, I would like to invite Robert Doubleday to present the 2020 Doubleday Award to Shirley Houston. Robert.
Thank you. That's very kind of you, Felicity. And it's just very brief word for me to say we're so grateful to you, Shirley, for accepting the award. And we just want to recognise the great contribution you've made to championing disabled people's rights. And particularly, I know the power of stories to create connections. And I know that's what we're going to hear from you now. But it's just my job to hand over this medal. So this medal is to recognise your achievements and to thank you. And I can't really throw it to you, but it'll arrive with you soon.
I just think I'm bad at catching, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's such an honour. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And I guess I'm never quite sure of the netiquette of a round of applause, but perhaps we will give you a round of applause in any event. So there we are. So Shirley, may I invite you now to give your talk?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Now, this is so different than if I was on a stage. If I was on a stage in front of you, you would have a woman in a wheelchair, and we'd all be you'd be sat in the hall looking at me. Here, you can sit back, you can have a cup of tea, you can digest what I'm saying in a very different way. So what I'm hopefully doing is going to use some of my storytelling experience in a way to share my thoughts on what I think I've learned and I think would be useful to share with you. Stories are so important. They give us a different perspective. If you think back to where stories have impacted you in your life, starts really, really early as children. They're used to change how we think, how we sort of learn different things. So this is how I wanted to sort of use this to make us all have a think. So just have a think about disability. As a disabled woman, I know that a lot of people have, sorry, I'm just trying to see, really sorry. Just trying to find my screen share to see how, can anybody tell me if I have, I'm really sorry. I have no hosting, aha, I have my screen share. When you think of disability, most people have this sort of fear in us, disability. And I'm not saying, you know, you're all in the medical profession, so this is your world. But then there's also this thing about disability that we have across society. The thing is, with our stories of disability, we're quite far behind. So we've not been part of the general stories for so long, stories that go back centuries and centuries. So what I want to do today is invite you to think about how we share stories and how other people's stories can change the way you address your world, your practice. How do disabled people's stories fit in with your world? So if you can maybe just have a think of, where in the world do disabled people's stories fit in? Blowing wind there for background effect, because actually, if you think about it, we're not in many of our stories, really. That's the problem, because we've never really been included in stories. If I just want to go, first of all, tell you a little bit about disability history and movement. Now, in the 80s and 90s, disabled people came up with the idea of the concept of the social model and the medical model. Now, the medical model is very different to where you approach disability from. It's about that opinion of being fixed, a problem, an issue to address. Whereas the social model of disability is what actually disables us is the fact that the world isn't accessible. Let me tell you a bit of my story, which may help you see how that has impacted on me. Age 19, there I was in the nightclub. I had a dancing routine to this. I could walk. I'd strut onto that dance floor. I would feel the power of this music, and I was there. I was ready. And I was ready to say, I am what I am, because I was aged 18 and I was ready to grab to the world. Now then, if you cut back to the fact that then 5-6 years later, I was a wheelchair user. And the thing is about disability, there's always a sad piece of music to accompany that terrible story that happened to us. And that's perspective that we have in society of disability, that it's something awful, it's something tragic that happened. Yes, it was pretty rubbish and I experienced an awful lot of pain. It's completely changed my life, but it has taught me so much. I would not want to be without my disability, which is a really bizarre thing. If you think about the fact that my bones dislocate, I have fibromyalgia, which means that there's this massive pressure of inflammation, which makes you feel like you're being crushed under a block of concrete. You know, I can spend days where I've lost days unable to speak or move. You know, it could take you all the time in the world to just go to the toilet and come back, and then you have to lay down and recover before you can even speak. I lose my voice, it comes from my stomach, I have to push it up to be able to speak. And that happens to me 2 or 3 days a week, because I also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which means my bones dislocate and all my connective tissue tears. So, but take that away from me and I wouldn't know who I am. And what that has taught me as a human being, the solutions it has taught me, the way to look at the world in an entirely different perspective, the way it's actually quite a fast track to how people treat you, means you can really see into their soul very quickly. So you know that person would let me down in many years to come, but they've already had an attitude or an opinion towards me. I think what might be useful is if I tell you some disability facts, because stories can be told in many, many different ways, that they're used to correct, to educate, to understand. They're anecdotes. I was telling an anecdote the other day about one of my first telly jobs. And it was a very northern anecdote, that I'd gone down to the BBC, and it was an hour's drama at 9 o'clock on BBC One, and we'd gone for the read-through, and there was this big room, and it had a big read-through table where everybody sat around and does the read-through. But as I came in the door, I couldn't get anywhere other than where I was first put, and there was a big buffet table at the back. I was quite hungry, and I spent the whole afternoon thinking, oh, I just kept seeing egg butties come, and I love an egg butty. So after it went and I was about to go and get the train, I said to this lady, would you mind just filling me a napkin full of egg butties so I've got them for the train? She went, oh, Shirley, hello. I've come to say hello to you because you're the first disabled person we've had on the BBC at 9 o'clock in a drama. So I'm the head of whatever, and I just wanted to come and say hello to you. And it was like, oh no, I've just done that Morecambe thing of going, can I have an egg butty? But what does that story tell you? That story, if I just told you about being the fact that we didn't have a disabled person on BBC One at 9 o'clock until early 2000, you'd be like, when you know about the girl trying to get her egg butty, it puts a different perspective on it. It makes you see the story differently. Now, somebody was telling me, I was looking up about how to tell stories on podcasts, and there's an example of, there was a man walked into a bar and he was shot. Or there was a man who he was quite down and depressed, and he loved country and western music, and he went to this bar every day after he'd been gardening in the morning and then reading with his wife at lunchtime. Then he'd go to this bar to listen to his favourite music, and then one day he walked into the bar and he was shot. Now you have a lot more empathy and a lot more connection because you've put a human element on it. And I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that we can start putting a human element on disability. You all work in a profession that is geared up for disability. It is around illness, etc. But weirdly, we still don't fit into your world in just a very similar way. But that's not you. That is the world as a whole. That girl that was on that dance floor, I am now that girl again. I am now ready to say I am what I am. And I can dance in somewhere and I can feel comfortable and in my own skin, in my own chair, what other people's opinions of me. But that took me 20 years. And I think that's what we need to do as a society. We have the responsibility as a society as a whole to make this change. It's not on the disabled person. It is not for things to be done for us. Let's start doing it with us. Now, if I tell you some disability facts, that might start to help you understand where I'm coming from. Because actually, if you think about where disabled people fit in our stories, we're not in the stories still. But does it come as a surprise to you to know that there's 14.1 million disabled people in this country? 14.1. That is 1 in 5 people. This is why it's so important to think about your story. Where are those 1 in 5 people in your story? And if they're not there, think about your team and take away 20% of those brains. Then that takes down the way you create things together. That takes down those conversations. It will be very, very different. But at the moment, we're currently missing out on 20% of people. Now, over 7 million people, or 18% of the working age population in Britain, are disabled. but disabled people are twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people. 8% of children are disabled. Only 17% of the 14.1 million people were born with their disabilities. Disabilities are acquired. Disabilities are never going to go away, but we have never set up our society to include us yet. But we can do it. And we can do it quite easily if we all just start looking at our stories a bit differently. 44% of pension age adults are disabled. 44%. And we are growing as a population. We are an ageing population. Now, Scope did this survey where it said 1 in 3 disabled people feel that there's a lot of disabled prejudice. Did you know that there are over 2 million people in the UK with sight problems? There are approximately 10 million people in this country with hearing loss. But we don't know this. Those figures might stay figures, but they don't enter into our brain as much because we're not in our stories. There's loads of us. There's loads and loads of us. But if you think around how many disabled people do you get connected with? It's all of our responsibilities to start looking at how we set up our teams, how we set up our working practice, how we go about our lives to start including more disabled people. I mean, okay, so I've looked at it factually. What I'd like to help you look at is, okay, so if you think now about your favourite TV dramas, 14.1 million people. 1 in 5 of us are disabled. It's not on our screens. We're just not on our screens. We're not in our books. We're not in our videos. We're not in our music. So therefore, we are seen as lots of individual entities because there's not a community that links us up. Because society does block us, then sometimes when you're looking at disability in your own world, you go, oh, it's that one person. No, it's 1 in 5. And what's so exciting about access is access enables things for everybody. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. I started at the age of 11 in a lot of pain. I've never stopped being in pain since. I went to drama school. The second year into drama school, I was told I was going to start using a wheelchair. Immediately, I stopped getting all the main roles. People stopped wanting to work with me. And I left drama school and I didn't get a job for 5 years. I became a wheelchair user in that time. And I looked on the telly and there's nobody like me. And that's what I think is so, so important as well. It's role models. If there wasn't anybody like me, the world is telling me I can't do that. You need to see us as doctors, psychologists, lawyers. You need to see us as lovers, mothers. You need to see us all so then everybody in society can go, they can be that as well. But at the moment, we all have this subconscious bias. We all have it. That we assume things because we look at how we hear stories and how we're told stories. And I know I'm talking from the creative point of view, but those are principles and ethoses you can put into your working practice because everything we have about stories and entertainment feed our knowledge. Now, when my disability and my life as a disabled actor, I got out of drama school. Nobody would employ me. There's no jobs for me. So I started my own company and it was fantastic. We did some audition training workshops. Liz Carr, who's now in Silent Witness, was one of those. We had people who'd stopped their jobs and became actors. And I fought and it became, on this lecture, it says I'm an activist. I'm not, I'm an actor and I'm a disabled person. And with that, unfortunately, becomes the title activist because I've had to fight to get everything I've wanted. And I stand here today because before me, people went and fought. They fought for our right to get in education. We didn't actually have the right to education to the 1970s properly. There was no educational, excuse the sirens, there was no law of education for us. In the 80s, if I had my disability and I lived in the 80s, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be on television. I'd be in a care home because that was my choice. So our history isn't very, we're not that far behind. So that's why we're perceived differently, because we've not caught up yet. If I was on a train in the 90s using my wheelchair and it was night, I'd be in the guard's van in the dark. That was the 90s. And do you know how that changed? Because people chained themselves to buses, stormed Parliament. So every step of our lives, we've got this fight as well. I'm over my disability. I'm well over my disability. But what I'm having to perpetually do is we're all put down to individual little fights. And that's why I'm trying to tell you stories today, because you can look at those, you can use those and go, okay, let's put disability on our agenda. Let's put it on every single agenda we ever talk about, and just talk about how we can create that inclusion. And then those people will come in. Those people will be able to experience services in an entirely different way. I know, so they will be able to add to the teams. They will be able to add to that general brain way of thinking, how we push society forwards, how we learn more. And at the moment, disabled people are still having to fight quite a lot to do that. I was incredibly fortunate to get a job on Coronation Street, and also to a place that has looked after me and embraced my disability. When I got my job, now this was also an example of how disability is so different in society. The audition process was 18 months long if you take the first audition to the last audition. We did a group one, they were auditioning men, women. So it's all that thing of, how do we tell our stories? The storytelling industry doesn't know how to tell our stories as yet. So therefore, other industries are still going to be going, of course. But you can start putting it on your agenda. You can start thinking, how do we do that? How do we include? Get a focus group. Talk to people. Just talk to people and go, okay, if I'm doing this, how would that impact on a disabled person? Now, I'm going to tell you a few stories in a bit. What I shall actually do is go to my first story that I wanted to tell you about Joe's Cervical Cancer Research Trust. Now, they did research and they found that women with physical disabilities are facing barriers to accessing life-saving cervical screening. They'd surveyed 335 women living with physical disabilities, and they found that 63% had been unable to attend a screening due to their disability, and half did not want to attend again due to a previous bad experience. So 63% found they couldn't, and then over half of everybody else had had a previous bad experience. 88% of those 335 women said that it was harder for women with a disability to attend cervical screening. Physical barriers, including not even being able to get into a surgery. These are medical places, we have medical issues, and yet 63% said, only 63% said that their GP surgery provided wheelchair access. Many of the women were unable to get on the examination table. Only 1% of those 335 women said that their GP surgery provided a hoist. This survey was done in the last couple of years. 23% of those 335 women said they needed a hoist to get on to the beds. That's 1 in 5. And 1% of GP surgeries had a hoist. Now, there's a story attached to this. Flo, who's 30, who'd never had a cervical screening because despite her GP being aware she has muscular dystrophy and access issues due to a disability, a hoist was not made available as it would take too long and there would be too much paperwork. She was even being told she could be taking a hoist away from somebody who needed it more. Now, it's an awareness thing. It's nobody's fault. It's society's knowledge of disability or thought processes. We're not on the agenda. We're not in the rooms. We're not in the stories. So therefore, we're always seen as individuals, just that one person that's a bit more difficult to organise. But there's 14.1 million of us. So it's that thing of going, actually, have a look around. Have you got hoists? Do you see, make it, the thing is, I think, about having conversations like these and being able to put stories in your head, it goes, if you could help us out and stop it being our battle, let's do it as a conversation. Let's do it as a two-way awareness. Let's spot what the blocks are and let's find a solution together. So therefore, invite people in, as you're developing new methods, new areas, whatever, invite some disabled people in, see how it can be made accessible. Get it in your team's thinking, put us on the agenda, and we as a society can make this massive shift so that we're much, much more accessible. It's also another example in another industry you may feel useful. Hotels, there is no law to say that there has to be an evac chair on every floor of a hotel. Me and my friend went to a hotel in London late last year, and we were on the 23rd floor, and then we were told there was no evac chair. So if there's a fire, I don't think we'd have got out, but there's no law against that because we're not in the stories, we're not on the news, we're not on people's agenda. So I think what would be great today is if you start thinking to yourself, how can I put this on the agenda? And it's through storytelling. There's a fantastic theatre company called Mind the Gap. Now, Mind the Gap, the director Joyce heard a story from one of the sisters of one of the Mind the Gap artists, Pippa, who has autism. Mind the Gap is a theatre company for artists, creative actors, directors. Paul, who shared this story with me, who's the associate producer there, for people, creatives with learning disabilities. Now, there's this story of Pippa, who has autism. Pippa was pregnant and she was going through a whole series of tests and examinations to see if she was able to keep her child. So some facts about that. The number of learning disabled people becoming parents is increasing. There might be 70,000 parents with learning disabilities in the UK. Possibly 2 have children in each of our schools. Advocacy groups tell us that up to 90% of parents, 90% of parents with learning disabilities have their children removed. What Mind the Gap did was they spent 4 years researching, and they talked to parents with learning disabilities. They spoke to 5 mothers and 3 fathers. 7 out of these 8 parents had their parenting skills assessed. 6 out of the 8 parents they talked to had been separated from some or all of their children for some time or forever. Now, I'm telling you this story because it's a different perspective as well, because actually what I think sometimes we're still looking at how we do things for people. And it's what we need to do is how we do it with them. What Mind the Gap did was they created a fantastic spectacle. They did this massive outside performance with this huge baby. They also worked with different medical institutions to work mixing art and medicine and knowledge, which is, I thought, really tapped into the way that you work, to share messages. Learn with us, not away from us. Now, what was really interesting, and I found Paul told me this, which I just pretty much blew my mind, is that there's a survey, a questionnaire that people with learning disabilities who are about to become parents have to answer. And it's a test to see whether they're capable of being a parent or not. There's 365 questions on this. Now, 4 non-disabled parents from Mind the Gap Theatre Company took the test and they failed. So what I'm saying is there's ways of looking at things in such a different way. And I think we need to start looking at that. Actually, we have opinions of disabled people that have changed. We've gone through education. We've fought and fought and fought, and there's so many more of us at the forefront now. And we live life very differently than what society perceives us to be. And we as a society, I'm guilty of it too, we all have this subconscious bias towards disability because we have these preconceived ideas and knowledge. Now, handicapped. The word handicapped comes from cap in hand. When disabled people years and years and years ago used to be thrown outside the city walls and they were allowed to come in to beg cap in hand. So we've never really been liked. So it's taken us quite a while to get to where we are now. And I just think what's so important, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find a picture of Mind the Gaps. Please look them up because they are a fantastic theatre company. To show you how what they've done, and I think it's that concept, is they've taken things that are important to the community and created art from it, created stories, created ways of looking at it from a different perspective. And that's where I think storytelling can really change how society views disabled people, is we can start looking at it from a different perspective. And I think that's, for anybody in any area of work, and particularly your area of work, if you start looking at things from a different perspective, because you are trained to fix, to solve problems, but it's also what's so exciting about the Doubleday Centre is your approach of holisticness, your approach to the 360 approach, and that is something that we do in Triple C. Now, I started Triple C, the Disabled Creative Confidence Collective, 4 years ago, because I didn't get a lot of work as a disabled actor for a long time. And I was so fortunate in that time to spend a lot of time running workshops in disabled schools. In schools, in holidays, I'd go in and we'd do a project. It was fantastic, me and like 30 kids, and we'd make a play in a week or a video. It was brilliant. And one of those young people was coming near the end of her life 3 or 4 years ago because she had a spinal injury, I think something with her spine to do with Ehlers-Danlos, which meant that she'd been given a bit of time, not very long to live. And she phoned me up and she said, I just want to thank you for those workshops, because a disabled woman, I'd never met somebody with a disability, and yet somebody with a disability came into my school and was creative and taught me, because the thing is with drama, it teaches you confidence, it teaches you identity, it gives you, because of the way disabled young people are looked after, and also sometimes because of communication and education, a lot of our processes are slower in life journey, I suppose, because we don't get to play sometimes. We don't get all those learnings in different ways that non-disabled young people do. So drama is a real key element in that, because it gives you lived experiences, it gives you schemas, it gives you so many different approaches, it gives you confidence to experience things. And the difference I used to see in young people is phenomenal. And that's why I thought, I was driving to work the next morning at 6:30 going, we can do this. If that can impact on one young person, then we can do it again for many, many more. So we set up Triple C. We have done a year's residency in Seashell Trust. Now, if I could give you a couple of stories from there, we had one young man who was restrained by 2 carers all the time. He stayed in the room for 5 minutes the first time, and the carers were very impressed with that. He used one sign name. Within 7 weeks, he was sat unrestrained for 45 minutes doing drama. We had another young man at a different disabled school who never spoke. After 5 weeks, he was speaking in sentences, he was fighting with his sister, he was asking to go to parties, because it's a different approach. Drama is a connection of emotion, storytelling, something that makes you engage. Now, my third story I want to share with you is a book I read recently by Jonathan Bryan. Now, Jonathan Bryan, I think, is 15 years old now. He wrote this book. Jonathan has many different disabilities. He's nonverbal, and his school didn't teach him how to read. they taught him how to, he had a communicator and he worked in pictures. Now his mum started to teach him a bit at home, and he started to learn to read, how to spell. And then he started to spell more. So they asked the school, because did you know it's up to each individual head teacher. Please tell me how much time I'm aware of. I might be talking a little bit long, but each individual head teacher of disabled schools decides what exams we're going for, decides how disabled young people are taught. So some disabled schools don't teach non-verbal children how to read. 2020. Without the ability to read, you haven't got the ability to communicate in the way you want to. Jonathan wrote this fantastic poem. We are not capable of learning, so do not tell me there's something going on behind the disability. Treated as useless handicaps, minds with nothing in there, tragically stuck in a wheelchair. Disability is visibly crippling, just incontinent and dribbling. We're not academically able. You should make our minds stagnate in special education. We cannot learn to read, learn to spell, learn to write. Instead, let us be constrained by a sensory curriculum. It is not acceptable to say we have the capability to learn. Schools should occupy us, entertain us, but never teach us. You are deluded to believe that our education can be looked at in another way. At the end of the poem, Jonathan then wrote, now read it again, backwards. Our education can be looked at in another way. You are deluded to believe that schools should occupy us, entertain us, but never teach us. We have the capacity to learn. It is not acceptable to say, be constrained by a sensory curriculum. Instead, let us learn to write, learn to spell, learn to read. We cannot stagnate in special education. You should make our minds academically able. We are not just incontinent and dribbling. Disabilities visibly crippling, stuck in a wheelchair. Minds with nothing in there, tragically treated as useless handicaps. There's something going on behind disability, so do not tell us that we are not capable of learning. That's a 15-year-old boy whose mother took him out of his school so she could teach him how to read. He then set up a whole petition to say, teach us, because in his school he was placed at separate distances from his friends, unable to communicate, because we as society have got the wrong perspective of what disabled people are. And it's so exciting what we can do and what those minds are. What an incredible mind. Where is he going to go because he's learnt to read? Why are we not allowing people to live to our full potential? And what you do in your world is enabling part of that. It's the physical side. So if you put that magic and that creativity of those stories into the way you approach things, how different we can make the world. Could you just put in the chat if I've got about 3 minutes, because I just wanted to share something else with you, if that's okay. So Triple C, I set up Triple C within 4 years. We went into schools. We're still doing this work in schools. We set up Manchester Mental Health Choir, Be Vocal. Within 2 years, they'd sung at Wembley to support the Heads Up campaign. They sang at the Royal Variety Performance with Emily Sandé. And what was so exciting about that was we were using the stories to show that singing, how many endorphins it produces, how singing together, you've created a community, you're taking the pressure off achieving on your own. There's lots of different concepts in there. And what's so exciting about that is that Be Vocal has now grown so big, it's gone to live on its own entity. We also set up DANC, the Disabled Artists Networking Community. And that was because we're all individuals. We all felt it was just us, just that one isolated. I was forever told in my career, we don't know where to find you. You know, there's so many anecdotes and stories from a disabled actor's point of view of turning up to audition for doctors, being auditioned in a corridor, auditioning in the Spotlight building in Leicester Square, then having to have my audition in Leicester Square because they didn't have a ramp to get me in the building. There's so many things of this approach of the world of just because we're all seen as individuals. So it's like, okay, Well, let's get us together. Let's get a community. Let's build a community so they know where to find us. We now have, we used to meet at different arts organisations, and the concept was, and this is where I think it's really important to share with you, is the concept of making a change through conversation. So we'd be at a different arts venue. So we've been at the Lowry, Bridgewater Hall, Royal Exchange, etc., etc. And we launched at home. And on that day, we didn't know what would happen. And 60 disabled people from all over the country walked through those doors. Just before lockdown, we had our last one at ITV London. We had 113 disabled people from all over the country. We've had people fly from Spain. We've had people from Land's End, John O'Groats, Plymouth. They come from everywhere because there's nothing like it, because disabled people haven't got something that connects them. So that's, how do you put that concept into your world? How do you connect those dots? How do you connect your thinking with disabled people's thinking to make everything accessible, to get those in the room with us, not for us? Join us together. My dog's gonna be so excited that the sticks are gonna come back. But it's 1 in 5 people. And what we've been doing is having stories with television production companies, with theatres, with writers, going, why? What are the blocks? Here are the blocks from the disabled person's point of view. What are the blocks from the industry's point of view? What are the solutions we can figure out together? It has to stop being something that's done for us. It has to be something that's done with us. Now, of that, we've now got 900 members, 900 disabled artists. We've got 6 writers going through spec script stage. We've had disabled writers said we don't know how to pitch for TV. We ran a workshop. From that, somebody got commissioned for Moving On. Somebody got down to the top 2 in Apple against Steven Spielberg. We're suddenly getting much more of a presence. If you start to look on your screens, we're starting to appear a little bit more because we're talking together. We're having conversations. We're not waiting for the world to be fixed for us, but we're going, we know how to help you. Because the thing is with disabled people, it's quite scary because there's a fear of getting it wrong, fear of saying something wrong, but it's okay as long as the intention's right. So I think it's almost sidestep that and go, what's my pledge? What can I pledge today? What is the thing I can do? And what is the thing I can keep on doing? Put it on your agenda. Put those, because there's a lot of us out there. And there's a lot of interesting minds that we're not tapping into. I just want to finish with you today to show you something that happened. Ooh. Sorry, I'm just finding this. Oh, I'll put in the chat as well a link to the Dank introduction so you can see what it is we're doing and how big we have grown. What happened today was on Twitter, which was so nicely timed that I woke up to this. Because on Coronation Street, that's what I meant to say to you as well. On Coronation Street, they took me around and they said, how can we help? How can we make this accessible for you? So I work 4 days a week. I have a bed in my dressing room. I have electronic doors that open. But that taught a different mindset to the rest of the team, because everybody's a bit more aware to open doors for shares or which means you're a bit more aware of everybody else. So that makes it really exciting to how it sort of shows how much disability can make a change. I'm going to share with you now what I woke up to this morning, and it really shows how telling stories can really make a difference.
When Gary and Izzy got together, 9-year-old me was shocked, because as a wheelchair user, I'd never seen another disabled person with a boyfriend before. But as time went on, it started to prove to me that one day I could have that too. The idea that disabled people and able-bodied people were allowed to be in relationships together blew my mind. and I have Corrie to thank for the fact that I saw myself on television.
What an honour to be able to make that change, because we all know we can make that change, but we can make that change collectively. It doesn't have to be as slow as it's been. We collectively, the world can start thinking outside the box and include others. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk with you today. That was a great honour, and thank you so much for my award. I am beyond proud. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I think that's got to have a round of applause or a hand on the chat. You really spoke from the heart, and I could see the comments coming in onto the chat. I did say Coronation Street was a great Manchester institution. You certainly proved it, and wonderful to finish with that tribute to you and the character that you have portrayed, and the way in which well, art reflected life in that way. We just perhaps take one or two questions. I suspect practically everybody will be wanting to go away and read the book I Can Write. And I was very struck by a comment from Hamid Haroun, nothing about us without us. And also a very specific question from Thomas that you might want to just address. How have you managed with chronic pain over the years?
I'm not very good at pacing. Pacing is supposed to be the key. I'm a bit rubbish at, but also I think chronic pain is hard, and I think we have a couple of days a year where you think, my pain is absolutely extreme, and I do have a couple of days a month where I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to wake up the next day because it's so massive. And I don't mean that in a dramatic sense. What I'm trying to do is convey to you that it's not an easy thing to live with at all. But what I found is that distraction and achievement are brilliant byproducts of trying to avoid pain. They also, when I crash, I've not crashed for just being poorly or disabled. I've crashed because I've achieved something. And creativity gives you a massive dose of endorphins, and I think that's a really useful thing to know. I did a Radio 4 documentary about it called, it's a terrible name, The Agony and Ecstasy. That's really worth looking up, because for years I kept thinking, how can I not even dress myself? But if I've got to be on the set, I can get there and I can talk. And it's about adrenaline and creativity and what that gives you. So if you want to look that up, Agony and Ecstasy on Radio 4, I went and interviewed other people with disabilities in creativity and pain to see how that impacted.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I mean, I think you've highlighted in some of what you said also about the way in which people are perceived, and actually trying to get maybe particularly health professionals to change their perception and way of looking at people with disability. Can you think of any one thing that might enhance perhaps a first encounter between a health professional and someone with either a visible or maybe an invisible disability, in terms of good communication?
I think the best communication is just to say, if you're not sure, go, I'm a bit sure and unsure, this is a new experience for me. Can I ask you certain questions? Always ask, never assume. Because the individual has solved a lot of problems, a lot of solutions in their time, so they can help. And also, I think something about disabled people, because your brains are all really interested in it, in the way the body works. For example, now if I go to somewhere, I go, when they ask to examine me, I go, I'm sorry, but what's the reason why? Because somebody might be very interested to see how far that shoulder can dislocate or how much my knee bends back, but that's me in bed for 2 days. So, and I think a lot of us, my friend the other day was saying, I just wished I'd stopped being seen as a case study, because we're an individual, build that relationship, and then you can earn that in a way, because it's about seeing us as all the others, as the same as everybody else who comes into your surgery. And or wherever you are, would you do those things with somebody else? If you wouldn't, then remember that the person's come in because there's an issue.
Sure. Thank you very much indeed, Shirley. I think in a normal question and answer, of course, we'd be taking questions from the floor. It's a bit more challenging in this environment, but there are loads of incredibly positive comments on the chat. I'm sure you've inspired many, many people, and many thanks to you.
Thank you.
So we will now move on to the next part of the afternoon. I'm delighted now to invite Dr. Kalisha Allen and Ariana Gizan, who are representing the Manchester Doubleday Student Society, to tell us about this exciting new venture. Is it Ariane or Kalisha who's going to start?
Sorry about that. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Kalisha Allen. I'm a Foundation Doctor at the Whittington Hospital, a recent graduate from the University of Manchester and a National Ambassador for the Centre.
Hi everyone, I'm Ariana. I'm a second year medical student and I'm also the secretary for the Doubleday Centre Student Society. So I'm going to start off I'm just going to talk a little bit about the society and what we do. So I just want to start off by saying that we're really proud to have this society at Manchester. It's the first of its kind. And as a society, we believe that patients are more than just a set of symptoms that need to be cured, but that they're also human beings with their own unique and individual personal circumstances. The society works really closely with the Doubleday Centre for Patient Experience to support its key aims of continuously improving interactions between doctors, students, patients, and the general public, but also at the same time making sure to develop meaningful and truly equitable relationships. So as a student society, what partnership between medical students, patients and the public. And we also hope to promote the Edwin Doubleday Fund and the National Award and also the New Student Award. And through like lectures, webinars, and as far as the situation allows us, events and workshops and stuff, we hope to be able to get these messages across. So to give you a quick idea of what we do as a society, it's our first year running. And I'd say our sort of main event that we've had this year was our 999 day webinar. So on the 9th of September, the National Emergency Services Memorial was in partnership with the 999 Emergency Services Day team to send a collective message of thanks and remembrance to those people who lost their lives doing their life-saving work. And as a society, we wanted to take part to commemorate the people who lost their lives and recognise those people and everything that they do for us. So we hosted a webinar and Professor Felicity Stewart also co-hosted with us as well. And we had members from various emergency services and they were there and they told us about their work and the work of the emergency services and how it's been affected since the COVID-19 outbreak and also the impact it's had on them. And we also launched a campaign which Kalisha will tell you more about.
So our most recent project is the Smile Behind the Mask campaign. The inspiration for this campaign actually came from my experiences as an interim foundation doctor during the pandemic. It was the first time I'd really worn PPE in a ward environment, and I felt that it impeded my communication with patients. And in particular, I noticed that it was difficult to communicate emotions and empathy. And this was really difficult when I was breaking bad news or talking to patients about sensitive issues such as domestic violence. So really the aim of the campaign is to reassure patients and their families that we as healthcare professionals and auxiliary staff continue to care and show compassion even when this may be somewhat obscured by our PPE. And we want to show patients that we are truly still smiling behind our masks and we really do truly still care. So what we'd love is that everyone would get involved in the campaign, and taking part is really simple. All you need to do is take 2 photos, so one with you smiling and one with you smiling but with a mask on. And we'd also love it if you'd add a tip on how you best communicate in PPE so that we can share this learning as it develops. And then all you have to do is post the photos and tips on Instagram or Twitter, and use the hashtag Smile Behind the Mask, and please tag the Doubleday Student Society. And Ariana will tell you a bit more about our social media channels.
So our social media, if you just on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, if you just search Doubleday Centre Student Society, it should just come up. Really hope that you take part, because we feel like this campaign is really quite important and really gets across what we feel. Yeah, we also update our events on the social media pages, and we have some really interesting posts about patient experiences and patient perspectives. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kalisha and Ariana, for introducing that and outlining the work, and how extraordinary that, you know, yet again the COVID pandemic has introduced potentially another barrier for people with perhaps hearing loss and so on, and that's one of the important things that you're addressing in your campaign, The Smile Behind the Mask. Thank you. So I would now like to turn to the Doubleday Student Award, newly inaugurated this year, and to come back to Dr. Kalisha Allen, because Dr. Allen successfully graduated from the University of Manchester this year under the very extraordinary circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. As she's told you herself, she was one of those who were graduated early in order that they could join the NHS workforce early as an interim foundation doctor, and her foundation training proper is now fully underway in the Whittington Hospital in London. That was a historic time for our 2020 cohort, and of course Kalisha will now have another historic achievement on her CV as the first recipient of the new Student Award in the Edwin Doubleday Fund. She's receiving this award because while she was a medical student, she helped expand student involvement in the work of the Doubleday Centre for Patient Experience, and latterly helping to establish the society that she's just outlined to you. This is the first student society in the country dedicated to promoting student and patient partnerships. Since she's graduated, she's continued as an active member of the Student Society, and most recently, as again she has already outlined, has been instrumental in this very important launch of the campaign, The Smile Behind the Mask. Such an important contribution to patient-clinician communication issues in this very difficult period. So in recognition of her exceptional contribution to the Doubleday Centre for Patient Experience, I would now like to invite John Doubleday to present the very first Doubleday Student Award. John, would you like to unmute? Thank you.
I can speak for my father. He's saying, I know that's slightly against the message of this afternoon, but I will voice my father's intentions, which is to say huge congratulations and here's a medal and well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I mean, these medals are absolutely magnificent, and a wonderful and generous donation from John, and the use of his fantastic talents to honour our speaker and our student recipient of the award. Many congratulations, Kalisha, and we wish you every success in your future medical career. So to close, finally, I would like to invite Professor Graham Lord, who is Dean of our Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health, to give the vote of thanks and make some closing remarks for this afternoon's event. Graham.
Thank you very much, Felicity. And first of all, congratulations to our 2 award winners, so Shirley and Kalisha. Very well deserved. And actually, it's an honour for me to sort of give the closing remarks and to attend my first Doubleday lecture. I returned to Manchester just over a year ago after having been away for 1 or 2 decades, and it's great to be back up north. What I'd really like to do also is thank John and Robert and all of the trustees from the Doubleday Trust for their support of the Doubleday Centre that makes all of this possible. And it really is quite sort of unique and extraordinary. And I think this year it's particularly important to mention that not only was Manchester Medical School the first medical school to establish a dedicated centre to deliver patient public involvement and engagement and communication through Doubleday, but as you've heard, we've also a sort of dedicated student society. And I think we're further extending our national reach, as I hope as a national exemplar, by establishing the first medical schools collaboration on patient partnership in medical education that's supported by our regulator, the General Medical Council. And we're also engaging with students through the Doubleday National Student Prize, as you've just heard about, on patient partnership, and that's been facilitated through the Royal Society of Medicine. So this really is a unique collection of events, all supported by the Doubleday Trust. So again, once again, thank you to that. And I guess very, very briefly, just a few reflections on sort of what Shirley so powerfully said, really about the power of individual stories, which has been a sort of fundamental means of communication long before we had Instagram and TikTok and these sort of things. And I think they're really an important way of communicating our humanity, which I think is what I think sort of Shirley was referring to with her really, really important and powerful stories. And as people will know, the University of Manchester's motto is Cognito, Sapientis and Humanitas, knowledge, wisdom and humanity. And I think that's encapsulated by this event and the partnership between the Doubleday Trust and the Manchester Medical School. I think it's important of all of us to think about, you know, the power of individual stories. Why are they so powerful? And I think what we've seen today, that we see not enough of, but we're seeing more of, is that they amplify the voices of people that are unheard. And actually your 14.1 million number, Shirley, was very, very profoundly affecting. And I think having that voice come together, then it makes those voices heard. And again, it's not just about disability, it's also true of poverty and homelessness and other groups that are disenfranchised. And if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I think that's really important. I think in terms of the medical school within the faculty of the university that I'm privileged to lead, I think it also provides an inspiring sense of mission. And again, the focus around the medical school and the Doubleday Centre here really gives us the opportunity to do that. And I think it also underpins the values that we want to see in our society. And as you know, junior doctors, healthcare professionals, patients involved in this, carers, parents, children, I think that's even more important at the moment, particularly with the sort of fragmentation of message that we're seeing on social media. And I think what it does is these stories provide a sort of golden thread that will outlast our medical training as students, and hopefully will provide that sense of continuity of those fundamental values. As we saw, you know, and as we see every day, and we're seeing it right now, Manchester in the Northwest is in the middle of the sort of second wave of COVID. This is an extraordinarily challenging time for everybody, but I think particularly people who have become more isolated. There are increased pressure on health services in all of our societies, and I think Kalisha and her project with her sort of smile behind a mask is a really great example of how we need to sort of re-emphasise the values that we have as healthcare professionals and really think about these additive pressures that people whose voices are not heard as powerfully as they've been heard in the last hour or so are represented, and you know, how we work with people, how we, you know, with people, not for people, I think is also very, very powerful. And that's what COVID is doing. It's making us re-emphasize the fundamental values that we have. So I think in closing, I'll just say, I think it's really, really key now for all of us to keep reflecting on these fundamental values as we head through a period of unprecedented challenges. But actually, it's events like this that make us realize what we are all here to try and do together. And once again, I'd just like to thank everyone for their contributions. It's been an extraordinary privilege for me to listen to that and to give the closing remarks. So I'll finish there. Thanks, Felicity and everybody.
Thank you very much indeed, Graham. And again, I would just like, before we sign off from Zoom, to thank Shirley, to our students, to Rabina, to the trustees of the Doubleday Society and the Doubleday family in particular, and to John for the wonderful contribution he makes in his artwork and the presentation of those wonderful medals, which I'm sure will be received with great pleasure when they arrive. Thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon, and all the very best. Thank you. Goodbye.